Hi, everybody, and welcome to Strata's first ever orchestration kitchen. My name is Mark Callahan. I'm head of product marketing, and I'll be your sous chef today. And I'm joined by our head of solutions engineering, who's also our head orchestration chef, Terry Kozart, as we'll be talking through how you extend Okta to unmanageable applications. Okta is an incredible SSO and authentication solution, and works really well as we're looking at all these different modern apps. But one of the things that we've been hearing from customers and just across the board is that it does get kind of difficult when you're looking at legacy on-prem applications that don't speak modern identity protocols. So what we're going to do today is we're going to dive into the kitchen. We're going to take a look at this recipe and how we actually do it. And so as we take a quick glance at what we're going to cover during the orchestration kitchen today, we're not going to sit here and talk you through a whole bunch of slides. So don't worry, this is going to be a very interactive experience with everybody. Terry, let's take a look at the agenda right fast and just see what we're going to cover. So with every episode of the Orchestration Kitchen, we will give just a quick introduction about what identity orchestration is. This isn't meant to be a sales pitch. This is really to talk about the foundation for how we're going to be cooking today, whether it's sous vide or something else. But then we're going to dive into the recipe. We're going to whiteboard this out. We're going to cook it live, and then we're going to answer questions from the audience. And so, Terry, as we start thinking through this, I would love to tee you up, sharing just a quick overview of what identity orchestration is.
Yeah, I'd be happy to, Mark. So simply put, identity orchestration is a new category that Strata has pioneered. And the idea here is that for any of the identity related services that any application may need, we give you the ability to abstract out to that. And some of the benefits that you get from this kind of a pattern is that you can use great platforms like Okta and take advantage of that for applications that just don't play nicely with Okta. And there's a number of reasons and a number of types of applications that fall into that category. But simply put, the orchestration layer allows us to determine you can have one or more instances of authentication, which is really handy in a merger and acquisition kind of a pattern that Okta is fantastic. Sure. But what happens if you buy a company that has a different technology, but it's important that they all play in the same application at the same time? The same thing is true for all of the other identity-related ecosystem partners. We can easily, declaratively, in a no-code manner, add in additional places to source information. If you're going to a centralized authorization engine, something like Axiomatic, Plain ID, OPA, Amazon Verified Permissions, we can bring those into your applications, even those ones that don't play nicely in a modern world. And then ultimately, the secret to our orchestration fabric is that we actually will create tokens that the application is expecting to see. So in many cases, the application doesn't know that the world around it's changed as we go through this entire process. Mm-hmm. So it's intended to be in an abstraction layer. It's incredibly quick to deploy. It happens very quickly. And we're going to show you exactly how we can do all of that today in our session today.
Awesome. Well, and I'm glad you mentioned the identity fabric because I know that's top of mind for a lot of people as they're hearing different analysts and organizations talking about an identity fabric. And it's how do you get there? How do you create an identity fabric? And I think what you just touched on is the fact that identity orchestration is that path to creating your own identity fabric with the various solutions you have. And so as we think about Okta, and one of the great selling points, and just it's very true in how you get started with Okta, is they've got a really deep connector catalog. They can work very, very quickly with any number of modern applications. But what we're hearing, and as we talk to a lot of our customers, we're hearing from more enterprises as they're starting to adopt Okta as their authentication platform of choice. And in doing so, they have a lot of legacy apps. They have applications that are maybe so old that they are back in the time when you and I were still using hair gel and pomade. They've been around for a while. And so as we think through the challenges of those, let's take a look at maybe what that process or that workflow would look like.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's go ahead and take a look at, do some quick whiteboarding on how we solve that exact problem. Because indeed, this problem space that you talked about, Mark, is exactly why we built a company. Goodness, didn't zoom into the right spot there. So for legacy and standard applications, it's exactly correct that most organizations of any longevity have a bunch of these. These are the applications that have been serving the business really well for a long time, but they were just built at a time before the standards on which Okta sits existed. So what we've built is a purpose-built identity fabric that makes it really easy to make Okta better and get its reach to all of these kind of capabilities. So here we've got, in a traditional environment, you've got the users that are then going to try to ultimately get to these legacy-based applications. These applications tend to fall in a variety of different patterns. Some of them expect headers, which is consistent with the SiteMinder, Oracle Access Manager, IBM ISAM kind of models back in the day.
Okay.
Some are expecting Kerberos, or integrated Windows authentication, if that's a term you're familiar with. And other applications just have their own login form natively. And so the challenge is, traditionally, in order to get Okta to be able to protect those types of applications, you have to rewrite them. You have to add a software development kit. You have to do additional work to the application, which is really expensive, very time intensive, and really a challenge to do. That's where Strata comes in. That's why we built our orchestration platforms, to make all of that easy, because we can do all of those functions easily without rewriting the application. So let me show you the steps with which we can do that, and we'll walk you through exactly doing all of that together.
That's perfect. And I'm actually glad that you touched on the process, because our attendees, many of whom are already Okta customers, are going to be familiar with Okta Access Gateway, which is certainly a good solution for a specific set of applications. But as you started talking through the breadth and the types of different legacy apps that exist, as well as needing to pull in attributes from other attribute stores, often in the case of a complex policy for an old application, that's where the magic of Mavericks really sits. So let's take a look at what you got to show us.
Yeah, absolutely. So from our graphic, our web UI, the first step you want to do in any kind of deployment for a single application or a bunch of them is you create an identity fabric element. The way we think of the fabric elements, these are the really deep integrations that we're going to use a platform for authentication. So the ones that we're going to pick on for this recipe is, obviously, we want to integrate with Okta, because that's exactly what we're here to do. We're here to extend the value that you already invested in Okta to applications that just make it a little harder. So we need to add the integration with Okta. And then in our case, we're actually going to go beyond what Okta can do. We're going to integrate with a local LDAP that has additional information that, for whatever reason, either hasn't gotten to the Okta Universal Directory or just doesn't make sense to synchronize it up there. So what the orchestrator can do is we can runtime grab all of that. So first step, create the building blocks, if you will, of all the fabric elements that are important. The next thing we want to do is add the applications themselves. Now, you as an identity administrator can do that yourself, or you can have the application owners come in and do it, because they're often the ones who know these things better. So in this part of this step, we're actually just going to focus on the applications themselves. Where do they exist? Where can we find them? Are there key pages that are important for us to protect differently than the other kinds of capabilities there? Yeah. And so here we then start to model, does the application expect headers? Does it have a login form? How does the application expect to know that it's got an authenticated, authorized user?
And so you mentioned the identity administrator, or even the application owner. So what we're talking about here is actually a self-service, no-code solution as well. Again, extending and accelerating that investment that somebody already has in Okta, but not needing to bring on a team of developers to do so.
100%. Yeah, that's exactly what we're there for. The ethos around our company is that we believe that if we have created a solution that you can't be successful in under 10 minutes, then we're not doing our job very effectively. And that's exactly the ethos with which we built this product. All of the fabric elements, all of the application definitions, and even the deployment can be done in minutes, not months.
Awesome.
So then the final step, once we've got the applications defined, once we know more about them, once we have the fabric elements that we want to stitch together, we now have the ability to create a user journey. We create a user flow that determines who should I use for authentication? Who should I use for authorization? Where can I go get attributes that are important to the application so that it can either run effective policy or be personalized so that the end user gets the best possible user experience? All of that is through point and click declarative models, and it's really intended to be as simple as we could think to make it. So ultimately, the flow when a user tries to go to an application is they're going to start, obviously, from their browser or their mobile device or their mobile application. Unbeknownst to them, they're going to traverse our proxy. The proxy is actually going to determine whether or not we've seen you before. If we haven't seen you before, we're obviously going to send you down to Okta because that's what Okta does really, really well.
Mhm.
Okta will probably do risk scoring, do some kind of conditional access checking, whatever policies that are important to you, probably MFA if it's a key application that we're protecting. And then at this point, if it's appropriate, we'll go down to that LDAP and we'll get extra information. We'll do extra policy checks if that's interesting or important.
And it doesn't have to just be LDAP, right? You could please from any multitude of user store locations or attribute stores.
Exactly correct. It could be a
Okay.
database, a web service call, you name it, we can do it.
Great.
So then ultimately, if we pass the check, if Okta says you're great and you've got appropriate authentication and authorization to get into the application, then we allow the traffic into the application itself. The important thing to understand, though, in the eyes of the application, the world hasn't changed in many, many cases. So if it's an application that used to be protected by SiteMinder, for example, it doesn't know what SiteMinder went away. It's still SiteMinder is behaving the same way that it always has, and we can do this effectively at just great scale in minutes, not months.
And what I love about this, again, we had titled our session Extending Okta, but it's also accelerating Okta, because I know that as we talk to customers, they're finding some of these really thorny applications that they have to maintain those licenses, whether it's Oracle or SiteMinder, purely for a very small subset of apps to support what we're talking about right here. And so if what we're serving is actually the app's none the wiser, at this point, if we can get in front of it, we're actually helping them completely retire that legacy IDP as they need to.
That's exactly right. And simply one of the taglines that I think of when I talk to people about the new capabilities with identity orchestration is that Okta is amazing, but we make Okta better because we can accelerate your extending Okta's reach into those applications that traditionally would have been a lot harder.
I feel like there's a tagline in here, something along the lines of, we don't make the things you use, we make them better. I don't know. There might be something to that. We'll have to look into it. Well, as any good cooking show does, HGTV, they'll renovate an entire house in 30 minutes. And they're like, there's no way that's possible. But in our world, we're actually going to modernize an entire app in like 5 minutes. And it is possible. We're not going to do the magic of behind the scenes post-production edits. We're going to do this live. Can we maybe dig in and out of the recipe and kind of see this happen?
Heavens, yes. So what I'm going to switch to here is this is actually the dashboard for our cloud interface. This is where you go to make policy changes, add new applications, add new identity fabrics. So let me walk you through exactly what I did. So the first thing, if you recall, step one, create the fabric elements, because those are the deeper integrations that we need for all kinds of different things. Here we've got a number of them built, but we're going to show you about how easy it is to integrate with Okta. In this case, we can choose which protocol we're going to talk to Okta with. It could be OIDC, SAML, whatever your preference is. And this is all of the metadata exchange that you would expect from any of those modern protocols. You just put it here, you take the information from us and provide it to Okta, and then you create that integration quite easily. The same thing is true for LDAP. Since we're getting additional information from LDAP or other sources, here we actually say, where do we find that? How do I tell the LDAP that I'm authorized to get the information that's important to extract all of that? And then how do I make sure that it's searchable? So
this is, I apologize. I was just going to say, and this is another example of where certainly OAG is appropriate for certain applications, but as you get into more complex policy and authorization needs, if you need that fine-grained authorization to persist with that legacy application, that's where we're coming in to be able to set these attributes very specifically.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And so at this point, if you think about the analogy, I know we're using a lot of analogies today. These are the building blocks. These are the key components of the recipe, the key ingredients, if you will. So the next part, step two, creating the information about the applications themselves. Now, if I happen to know it, great. If I want to invite the application owners to come in and they'll own that part of the process, we're designed for that as well, to make it easy for the right people to make the right decisions for themselves. So the application that I'm going to be demonstrating here is something we call Sonar HR. It's sitting on this high-level port, wherever that happens to exist. And then we have different information about what happens if somebody's unauthorized, errors, those kinds of things. But the other thing, the resources, these are the important pages that exist within that application so that we can have different policies that says you may be able to get to the application, but you have to be in a certain department to get to this page. You may have to be in a different job title to go to a different page, or however you want that fine-grained authorization logic to do. And this tends to be a little finer grained than we see in a lot of the proxies that are out there in the world today. So let's show how that all goes together. So we determine we have the fabric elements defined.
Yes.
We have an application defined.
Yes.
Now, the last step is create the user journey or the user flow. So the application that I'm picking on is called Maverick 7. So here, this is where we determine how we stitch together all these pieces and parts. So I go in and I say, this is the application that I care about for this user flow. I could add multiple applications if they all behave similarly. I want to authenticate my users using Okta because that's what we're here to talk about. I do want to get some additional information about the users from a local LDAP that sits either in the cloud or near the application. And then the access control I have per page gets defined based on information that I can get anywhere. So if some of the information comes from Okta, fantastic. We already get that based on the claims it tells us about you. But if we want to go get your department from the LDAP in order to do authorization decisions, then we can go do that. The important thing to understand is the way the orchestrator does this, it's at the sub-second that it's needed. Everything we do is at runtime. We don't have a directory. We don't have a database. We're just a really, really fast, easy to deploy, hyper-performant capability.
Great. And so there's not any data stored or anything along the way in this either?
None at all. We would be doing you a disservice if we had yet another copy of all your data floating around.
Sure. We're simply using the ingredients where they already live and making them available as needed.
You get it. Okay. And so then the last part of the user flow journey is that the application, this particular application, expects to consume headers. That's how the application behaves. It used to be protected by SiteMinder. So it's expecting a header called SMUser. It's well understood for people who work with SiteMinder. So we're going to give it that same exact header, and we're going to source the information from one of the attributes we get from Okta. We're going to do the same thing for surname, first name, department, those kinds of things. You'll notice that the department isn't coming from Okta, it's coming from the LDAP. And so once we do all of that, we've got all the pieces and parts in the user flow that's out there. And then the last step that we need in order to deploy that to our orchestrator is publish it. You can publish this to any shared storage that you guys want, all of the common cloud providers, or you can download it to a laptop and push it to the orchestrator, whatever you need. The important thing to understand architecturally is that the fabric consists of two things, as easy as you could think of it. It's a executable, our product, Mavericks, and a configuration file that gets generated when you publish it. If it has those two things, you've got a fully working dynamic orchestrator. Now let's see it in action.
Awesome. Well, and just for what it's worth, I had a little timer going here as well. And so you talked about being able to do this in under 10 minutes, and you said it in about 5.5. So I think we're doing okay on that delivery of something in 10 minutes. So this view, we're actually seeing from the user's experience what this is like. So this is going to be the login now that you've published what that experience is actually like to that legacy app.
That's exactly correct. So all of the things that I built in our user interface get deployed to our orchestrator, and now they're enacting. It's sitting in front of an application that's expecting to consume headers, but appropriately, we want Okta to do what Okta does really, really well. So we're going to go ahead and log in. And then lo and behold, we're in an application. Not terribly visually exciting to the end user, but that's kind of the point. We don't want to change the user experience because they're very familiar with how things work today, but we would be potentially changing the login experience. They don't no longer get that SiteMinder type user login experience. They get the one that they're much more familiar with Okta. Right. Secondarily, is if you were already logged into Okta using other applications, they wouldn't even get prompted at all. They would just automatically get into the application.
Gotcha.
But some of the things that I did in the user flow, if you'll recall, is we actually created some conditional access, some finer grained policies throughout the application. So as I navigate through this application, I get a runtime evaluation from the orchestrator that says, great, Okta says you can get into the application, so we let you in. But in order to get to this page, we're going to see if you're in the right department. If you recall, I set that access control.
Yes.
Similarly, if we go into a calendar, we don't have the right department based on the policies for that. And so all of the information that we get can be actioned at the sub-second that it's needed because everything we do is just designed to be highly performant. Now, the other thing that's different with different proxies that you may be familiar with is that we're also getting information from LDAP. We did some of that for this policy, but here where I'm coming in to enrich the experience, that I'm not just giving the application the first name and last name, what it traditionally expected. I'm also saying, well, why don't we give that information to the application for personalization reasons as well as for policy.
That's right.
So we can do all of that really, really, really easily just through simple declarative UI driven changes. You can make any changes if you want to tweak it in the UI, push it out there, and within seconds it's fully deployed.
And in doing all of this old crusty Sonar app, we don't even know who wrote this thing and don't have access to the source code, anything. What you just did enacted a new access process without any code changes required.
That's exactly right. The application in this case doesn't even know SiteMinder isn't there anymore. It's continuing to hum on and serve the business as it always has.
But what we've done is we've fully extended Okta to all of those otherwise unmanageable apps and made good on the promise that we said we'd be cooking up in this kitchen.
Exactly right. So the benefit from an organization's perspective is that once we retire all of those SiteMinder or Oracle Access Manager or IBM ISAM type applications, then you can turn that off completely because you now have the ability to have Okta protect them all.
This is actually super timely. The only question that we have, and yes, the live question. Thank you for submitting this one. Is simply the idea of, so what would I do next? Why else would I have Mavericks in front of something?
Oh gosh, there's a lot of reasons. So this is kind of the first recipe that a lot of people are interested on, but every one of our customers has gone beyond this once they realize the power of the orchestration. So think, for an example, I mentioned it earlier about merger and acquisition. What happens if you buy a company who has a different technology, but they need to get to this application? Well, orchestration can do that really easily. We can do forking logic that says, look, this user, this acquired company, they can log in how they traditionally have because they haven't fully been brought over into Okta yet. Another one is resiliency. What happens if somebody digs up the fiber optics outside of your building, but the applications inside that building are critical to the function of your business? We see this a lot in hurricane regions in retail space, where the store has to remain open. It has to transact business because it's serving the community that's affected by the hurricane. Orchestration is a great way to do that because we can then fall back to some other type of authentication. The fiber optics were severed. There's no ability to get to Okta for authentication, but we can then fall back to something else. Maybe there's an identity cache, an LDAP server there that we can at least keep the access going. And those are all really simple things for orchestration to do. So there's lots of use cases, but those are two we talk about a lot.
Got it. Well, that was terrific. I mean, I think we talked about a cake that we were going to make. There was a challenge. There was a need. People were hungry for a new solution to extending Okta to those otherwise unmanageable apps. And I feel like we went through the recipe. We talked through the process. We showed that we were able to do this in about 6 minutes, and had a question about this. But ideally, like what we just showed was how this thing actually works, and made good on the first episode of our orchestration kitchen together.
Yeah, I think it was successful, and certainly something that anybody listening to the video or listening live can fully take advantage of.
Tell you what, if they wanted to learn more, our audience, some people like to just get their hands dirty and start cooking themselves. Do you mind switching back to our slides for just a moment? We'll give you a couple of things to leave on here so that you can take a look at more information about how you might work with this recipe yourself. And also, Terry, are you cool if we give your cell phone number?
Cell phone number, email, whatever we can do.
All right, we'll do your email. How about that? So what we're going to do is let's, if you go over just one slide on this, we'll actually be able to share a couple of places to go next, which is, Terry, we are going to give your actual email address because we don't want people to be inundated with spam, but we do want them to have the chance to talk with you about this experience. This is pretty slick stuff. And then also that UI that you shared, the Mavericks app itself, they can go right now to mavericks.strata.io and start cooking themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. So please get your hands dirty. This is a product we think is going to be really intuitive for you to work and very powerful. The one question that a request I have for any and all of you is don't let questions go unasked. Feel free to drop me an email. Feel free to drop a support ticket if you go to our Mavericks thing. We'll get the answer for you as quickly as we reasonably can.
I love it. Well, we made a delicious dish of extending and accelerating Okta deployments. We want to thank everybody for joining us. Be sure to check the Orchestration Kitchen Hub at the link that you see here on the screen. We're going to be doing more episodes like this and cooking up more orchestration goodness around challenges that we hear in the identity space. Terry, thanks so much for spending some time with me, and look forward to connecting with y'all at our next event and our next session. Thank you.
Thank you all.